皆さん、こんばんは。我那覇真子です。9時半ちょっと過ぎてしまいましたが、本日始めていきたいと思います。本日の、配信のテーマですが、生物兵器研究専門の医師が警告、パンデミック条約の危険性ということで、先日私が行いました、米国のですね、医師、この映像のインタビュー内でも説明がありますが、今はコロナ禍の起きたことがあって、医師免許を停止までさせられているぐらいの、方であります。メリル・ナス博士のインタビューをお届けしたいと思っております。ずっと取り上げているパンデミック条約の危険性ですけれども、これまで私のチャンネルではですね、内容にそこまで深くいくというよりは、手続き上の問題であるとか、そういったところに焦点を当ててきました。今日はですね、これまで生物兵器の歴史や、あるいは実際にですね、1992年に研究調査書を発表し、炭疽菌が生物兵器として使われた。そういったことを、ローデシア内戦の時に発表までされた専門家が、今回のパンデミック条約についてどういうことを警告しているのか。そういったお話を聞きながら、我が国日本の政府は前のめりになって、この WHO での交渉を進めている。そしてその中身というのは、私たち国民にはほとんど公開されることがありません。日本政府のどういう立場、どういうスタンスで交渉に当たっているのか、それも私たちは知ることができていない。しかしながらですね、今日のメリル・ナス博士のお話を聞けば、これがとんでもないこと、つまり、パンドラの箱を開ける、そういうふうな表現でもいいかと思いますが、非常にですね、危険なものであるというのが、さらに理解が深まると思います。それでは早速、映像の方をご覧いただきたいと思います。Hello everyone, this is Masako Ganaha. Today on my show, I have a special guest. Let me introduce her. Dr. Meryl Nass. Dr. Nass is a board-certified internal medicine physician and expert on biological warfare and anthrax. She has given 6 congressional testimonies and testified for legislatures on bioterrorism, Gulf War syndrome, and vaccine safety and vaccine mandates. She has consulted for the World Bank, the Government Accountability Office, the Cuban Ministry of Health, and the U.S. Director of National Intelligence regarding the prevention, investigation, and mitigation of chemical and biological warfare and pandemics. Dr. Nass was the first person in the world to investigate an outbreak and prove it was due to biological warfare, publishing the result in 1992. This was the world's largest anthrax outbreak, which occurred during Rhodesia's Civil War. She was a main author, along with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and the NGO Children's Health Defense, of a citizen's petition to the FDA regarding the COVID vaccines authorizations and their single approval, and a letter to the FDA and its Vaccine Advisory Committee regarding the many reasons the vaccine are not suitable for children. She is also the author of detailed articles regarding the suppression of hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin for treatment of COVID, which have been read by over 50,000 or more people on her website and have been reprinted on many other sites, and have been interviewed by all major US newspapers, TV networks, and numerous alternative channels. Her most cited papers include one investigating Zimbabwe's major anthrax epidemic and a review of anthrax vaccines' usefulness in biological warfare. Dr. Nass, thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Masako. Appreciate you doing the interview.
Thank you very much. So today, I just want to dive into the topic. So you have been warning people all over the world regarding pandemic accord or pandemic treaty, I should call. And in the perspective or your specialty, especially you've been working on biological warfare, and this aspect is not being much discussed in Japan. That's why I asked you for this interview. So could you first tell us what we should think about or know, please?
Yes. Well, the WHO is negotiating with its member nations and with stakeholders 2 different international treaties. One is completely new, didn't exist before, and the other is an attempt to add massive amendments to an existing document called the International Health Regulations. And what both of these documents will do is create a legal structure for a very broad, expensive biosecurity agenda. So there will be new labs formed, they're already being built, to store potential pandemic pathogens, which are, that's another name for biological warfare agents. And they will be shared, there will be gain-of-function research done on them. Vaccines will be created very rapidly. The plan is to have a vaccine developed in 100 days, manufactured in 30 more days, and then go out, give to everyone in the country without any liability if there are injuries. Vaccines normally take 10 to 15 years to develop. In Japan, you've had some problems with vaccines, and that led to removing mandates from childhood vaccines. So you have learned, in the United States, we've also learned, but the government has not admitted that some of the vaccines that we use have caused serious problems. And I would include the HPV vaccine, the anthrax vaccine, and the smallpox vaccines among them before the COVID vaccine. So vaccine side effects have been hidden. And I now wonder if that was in order so that people would not complain about the COVID vaccines being rushed out so rapidly. The first COVID vaccine in the US took over 300 days to be developed. The plan is for future vaccines to be developed in 100 days. Nobody will have liability. That means if the vaccine kills you or injures you, you're not allowed to sue the doctor, the clinic, the government, the manufacturer, nobody. Maybe you'll be able to get a small amount of money if you're injured or your family member is killed. But the WHO is requiring all countries to agree to create emergency use authorizations for unlicensed vaccines. They want to be able to use vaccines that did not get properly tested for safety and effectiveness in the future under the guise of pandemic response. That's pretty serious in my view. And in terms of whether sovereignty is being taken away from countries, these documents require countries to pass laws that will enable this to happen. So countries are told they have to pass laws that will allow untested vaccines to be used, and they have to pass laws so that nobody is liable for the injuries. We call that a sovereignty grab. When the WHO tells nations what laws they have to pass, then the orders are coming from the WHO. But the WHO is trying to hide that and says, well, no, the countries are the ones passing the laws, not us. We're just giving them suggestions. But no, it's not suggestions. In these documents, countries are required to obey.
I see. So it's very important for us to hear from the view of your perspective, because in Japan, there are many people who have realized the seriousness of this pandemic accord happening in World Health Organization. But we are only talking about power grab. but from the historical context, it's very important for us what is happening. And so I would like to ask you questions regarding your experience. Do you see the similarity or what's happening in World Health Organization right now? I read your paper, and one of the paper was talking about it's about sharing bioweapon. Could you please explain about this, please?
Yes. So let's go back to Peter Daszak and EcoHealth Alliance. So the United States at least 5 different agencies of the United States government were paying EcoHealth Alliance and Peter Daszak money. So his organization collected over $100 million in the last 10 or 15 years. And that was the Defense Department, the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, and other agencies. Why were they doing that? Most of the money was coming from the Defense Department, and they were actually, Daszak and EcoHealth Alliance were working with scientists in 31 different countries, particularly underdeveloped countries, and collecting bats and viruses that could potentially be used as biological weapons agents. We know that some of these viruses were being sent back to the Defense Threat Reduction Agency outside Washington. So what these documents appear to be doing is basically globalizing what Peter Daszak was doing and putting it in the hands of the WHO instead of EcoHealth Alliance. So the WHO will now be collecting viruses and microorganisms from all the countries in the world. That's over 200 countries. Well, there are 194 countries that are members of the WHO. They can collect new viruses, and if it looks like you can make a drug or vaccine using the virus, they will get paid money. They will get financial benefits. So that is the sort of arrangement that the pandemic treaty is offering them. And in earlier versions, it directed every country to go out and find these viruses. Go into the bat caves, see what you can find. Let's search and see what might cause human illness. The thing is that almost none of these viruses are going to cause illness in humans unless you modify them. So COVID was modified. COVID was passaged through mice that had genetic changes so that their lungs and part of their immune system was the same as a human. So it wasn't, they no longer had the mouse model, but they had the humanized lungs mice. And by infecting those mice over and over and over again with coronaviruses, you can create some of the changes that were in COVID. So you could make the virus prefer to infect humans compared to animals and bats. And so it turned out that COVID was able to bind to the ACE receptor of humans better than any other ACE receptors in animals. There was also a furin cleavage site. There were many other changes that were introduced to the COVID virus, SARS-CoV-2, to make it infect humans more easily and to cause various kinds of illness. So both of those things happened before the COVID disease exploded into the world. So it happened at one lab or it happened at many labs. You're not supposed to do biological warfare research. We have a treaty called the Biological Weapons Convention that says we should never make biological weapons. We shouldn't create diseases, viruses that can cause a pandemic and kill a lot of people or injure them, maim them, make them disabled. However, that treaty is weak. It does not have enforcement provisions and it does not have inspection provisions. And therefore, it can't really be enforced. And the interpretation of the treaty over time has changed. And so the United States government has come to conclude that it's okay to do gain-of-function research. Gain-of-function is a name that used to be called germ warfare research, and then it was called biological warfare research, and then biological defense research. And then to make it sound more benign, they changed it to gain-of-function. But it's all the same thing. It's making viruses either more transmissible or more virulent, or both. COVID had changes in it compared to an ordinary coronavirus that made it both more transmissible, more virulent and dangerous, and also made it go to more organs in your body than a normal beta coronavirus would. So why would we want to allow laboratories to continue to do this? We have a treaty that already exists that most over 180 nations have signed. What we need to do is strengthen that treaty. We need to amend that treaty, not create a new treaty that allows all of this research to go on and encourages it and pays for it. The question, what the WHO, I'm sure they don't, the people who work there, they don't want to create biological weapons, but they are very well paid. You know, their children go to private school, they have diplomatic immunity, they get tremendous benefits if you work at the WHO. And so they're just doing their job. They were told to create these documents, you know, and they are. And they probably don't even admit to themselves what it really means. And the problem is that the WHO is funded 85% by donors. And those donors include the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, other foundations Bill Gates has started, some countries, pharmaceutical companies, and others who will benefit from these two treaties. And so dues only pay 15% of the budget of the WHO. It is the big funders and the globalists who are really pushing this. And they are attempting to get it done, to have countries approve these two treaties before anyone really understands what is happening.
Oh, I see. So you just mentioned that those people are doing their job and they do not realize or they don't want to admit what they're doing. But once this pandemic accord is approved at the World Health Assembly, what the world is going to be like? Do we have to really afraid of pandemics or real pandemics that go out of control of our humans' hand?
Well, they are planning for pandemics. So, you know, we're talking about creating the infrastructure to do this was estimated by a contractor for the WHO at $100 to $200 billion. And then it's going to cost some amount of money. One person just suggested $30 billion a year to maintain it. There are a lot of people who are going to be benefiting from those kinds of funds. The World Bank is going to be financing a lot of this. Developing countries will be getting money to establish their own biodefense systems. You know, corporations that make products or make vaccines, that make, you know, PPE, masks, gloves, tests, you know, medical equipment, all of those industries are going to benefit from this. So there's a strong, you know, headwind in favor of it, and the people at so the WHO will grow. In fact, they were talking about creating a new secretariat. The budget of the WHO might go up 10 times from what it is now. It's right now $3 to $4 billion a year, so it might go up to 30 or 40 billion. So of course, people at the WHO are excited about this. The buildings are already being built. The laws are already being put into place at the European Union, in the United States, and in other countries. So in our Defense Department funding bill that was passed 15 months ago, it said that we will obey the WHO, the international health regulations, One Health, and the pandemic preparedness agenda. So all the pieces that will be part of this development are already being created all around the world, and it will all snap into place over the next months. And then if pandemics come, the Director General of the WHO will be able to declare a public health emergency of international concern. With the creation of the idea of One Health, it doesn't have to be a human health emergency. It can be an emergency with animals, plants, or ecosystems. And if you think about it, ecosystems includes everything in the world. So the Director General will be able to declare a public health emergency of international or regional concern for climate change, for gunshots, for pollution, for loss of biodiversity, as well as for human illnesses. Now, in the 20th century, there were 3 pandemics. We really only noticed one of them, which was the 1918 influenza. But Tedros has been the Director General of the World Health Organization for 6 years, and he has declared 3 public health emergencies of international concern in 6 years. And the WHO before him declared many others. So since this century started, we've had about 10 declarations of emergencies. With Zika, with 2 with Ebola, polio, 2009 swine flu, 2002 SARS-1, 2012 Middle East respiratory syndrome. So what we can expect is if these documents are approved, there will be one public health emergency declared after another. The WHO will have the ability to demand mandates of vaccines. They will have no liability attached, and the WHO will also have the right to say which drugs we're not allowed to have. So we may not be able to get ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine next time if Tedros says so. You don't want to put that kind of power in anyone's hands. It's too much power. He doesn't know what is best for everyone in the world. Each country has different equipment, different medications available, different ways of dealing with things. And you cannot treat the world as if one size fits all. Someone in the middle of the Congo is not going to need the same treatment as someone in the middle of New York City. So, and Tedros is not even a physician. He has a degree in public health, in community health. He got for some studying malaria. So he's never treated patients. He doesn't have a medical degree. He's not really capable of making decisions about what treatments we should have. But really, look, the bottom line is that the powers that be in the world that are bringing this forward want the ability to vaccinate us, to create vaccines, and then to demand that we accept them. And we, the recipient, have no ability to really learn what is in those vaccines. We're only learning now what's in the COVID vaccines. We're learning about the plasmids that are in them that have the potential to enter the nucleus of our cells and cause genetic mutations. We didn't know. It took us, 3.5 years or 3 years to learn that. They're going to make these vaccines in 100 days and roll them out in 30 days more before anyone knows anything about really their safety, their effectiveness, or the quality of the manufacturing. And that's a huge problem. It's really to roll out vaccine. until 2005, when the United States passed the PrEP Act, it was against the law to inject anyone with an unlicensed vaccine unless you gave them a very detailed informed consent and an institutional review board had reviewed the experiment and decided it was as safe as it could possibly be, and that it was on the up and up. So you either got a licensed vaccine or drug, or you were in an experiment and the experiment had to be done very carefully, or the researchers could go to jail. The PrEP Act of 2005 created a third pathway to give people drugs and vaccines, even if they weren't licensed. And it took away informed consent, and it took away the institutional review board. It allowed the government to roll out vaccines with the Secretary of HHS declaring an emergency, the commissioner of the FDA saying, it's more likely than not, in my opinion, this vaccine or this drug will help you, and that's all you needed. And no liability, no way for patients to really, injured people to fight back.
I would like to ask you about your experience because your license has been suspended, and as far as I read the articles, because of what you wrote, not what you practiced to a patient. Could you please share us what happened?
Yes. So in October and November of 2021, two people that were strangers, I've never met them, they don't know any of my patients, complained to the main medical board where I live that I was spreading misinformation on the internet. And they had seen, one saw an interview that I did and one saw a tweet that I had written, and they complained. And really, those sorts of complaints normally would have no bearing because these are people that don't know me, don't know my patients, don't know how I practice. So they were complaining about me as a private citizen. They didn't like what I said. Well, in the United States, we have something called the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And the First Amendment, the part of the Bill of Rights, is freedom of speech. So I am allowed to say whatever I want as a private person. As a physician, I'm expected to practice to a certain standard, but nobody really accused me of not practicing to that standard. Well, then the Board of Medicine encouraged, they tried to find patients who would complain. And they asked these people, do you know any of her patients? We want to, interview her patients, but they didn't. And so then they found a doctor and a midwife who I had treated a patient, and they had also treated the same patient. So they got complaints from them, in one case that I had given ivermectin and the other that I had given hydroxychloroquine. And then there was a third patient who I actually reported myself to the board because I was very annoyed that I wanted the Board of Medicine and the Board of Pharmacy to change their policy. I explained to them how that I was being forced to lie to a pharmacist in order to get hydroxychloroquine for the patient, because the medical board had scared the pharmacists and the doctors and said, basically, you're not allowed to give those drugs out for COVID, but you can still use them for other things. And so the pharmacists were begging us, the doctors, to lie about the reason we were prescribing the drug so they would be able to dispense it. Anyway, so those were the three patient complaints. So initially, my license was suspended in January of 2022 for misinformation and treating patients with ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. But actually, all of those things I can do legally. We have the First Amendment, and ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine are fully licensed drugs, so I'm allowed to prescribe them. So the board was hoping I would just surrender my license and go away, but I didn't. I told them I want a hearing. So then they had to drop all those charges because they couldn't really, they didn't want to fight against the Constitution. And so they made up new charges, which were, I was not following the telemedicine rules. I was not getting an informed consent from my patient to have a telemedicine visit, which isn't necessary. I was sharing information about a patient with their husband or their wife, which is standard procedure. It's not, there's nothing wrong with that. But anyway, they found, and so they had a hearing, we had a hearing. The patients were all interviewed, and they all said my care was good. I hadn't shared information, improperly. I hadn't breached their confidentiality, blah, blah, blah. The board didn't care. They found me guilty of all the new charges. They told me my license was still suspended. I needed to go to 3 different kinds of courses. I had to show them my charts so they could review them. I had to get a practice monitor. I had to pay them $10,000. And then maybe they would let me have my license back. So anyway, I don't have my license back yet because I'm not interested in giving the medical board, which has no interest in the quality of my care or honesty, the right to determine whether I get to practice medicine, because they will hold that over my head. They will make my life a misery unless I do what they want. So I won't give them that pleasure. And so I assume that my medical license will remain suspended for the rest of my life. They even while it was suspended, they forced me to pay to renew it, and then they forced me to pay extra because it was late, and I think they were hoping I wouldn't pay, and then they would be able to say it had lapsed, and they wouldn't give it back. And so anyway, they'll want me to keep paying. But I know it's very funny. Anyway, that's the story with my license.
Wow. It's very shocking for me that America has been going this direction, like further and further. But for me, as a normal citizen, nowadays, I don't know which doctor to trust. But
Right.
people like you, you're the doctor who actually saving the world. That's the truth. So I will be praying for you so that real doctor will see the real future and protect us. Because now, informed consent not needed for doctors to give medicines. I am very afraid to go to hospital at this point.
Yes, all my friends are too. We don't know what happened to the doctors, and I think we realized that they had been taught to obey. That was their number one. You have to be very obedient to get through medical school and a residency. And almost all doctors in the United States work for, a hospital or work for a corporation. They don't have their own private practice anymore. And so if they didn't go along, they would be fired. So 80% of the doctors had to go along to keep their jobs. And then others are afraid that the medical board will take their license away if they don't go along. So they made a poster child out of me so that I was in the national news, so that every doctor would hear about what happened to Dr. Nass for spreading misinformation.
But thanks to you for standing up and keep fighting. That's why we are still be able to learn and know what to do if something happens. I myself travel a lot, many countries, so I always carry ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine because I don't want to go to the hospital where I cannot speak their language and I don't know who to trust. So I see the doctor's protocol online and try to do what I can do. Of course, within the law, but I know how I have to learn how to protect myself. So, yes. And
Exactly.
lastly, I would like to ask you about your overall thought on what is really happening in the world. For me, until I researched about you and what you've been warning us, I thought this world Health Organization Pandemic Accord Discussion Negotiation to take over the power all over the world started from COVID. So that was my understanding. They did pandemic so that they can introduce these strict regulations for totalitarian world. But it seems like you've been researching on biological warfare before, and many countries have agreed to abandon those kind of weapons. But because of the genetic engineering discovered, then those kind of history has different direction now. So are we actually in a biological war now? So things happening right now, we see, are we, well, how do you see, who is the player? What is happening? If you could give us those kind of idea.
Biological weapons used to be called the poor man's atomic bomb. So you can make them cheaply. And although some people dispute that it's easy to make them, it is easy to make. So it depends. It's easy to make an assassination weapon, for example. It's easy to, we know lots of diseases that naturally will kill somebody, and we know how to make them even more toxic if we want to. What we don't always know is how well a disease will spread in the world. If somebody starts spreading something in Wuhan, will it go far, or will it stop in Wuhan? Will it stop in that neighborhood? You can't really tell that because we don't know enough about bacteria and viruses and humans, the human immune system either, to be able to make good predictions. On the other hand, by growing viruses in humanized mice and by using other methods, you can be pretty sure that you can create a virus that is going to infect humans very easily. I think that's not hard. The other thing is, since 1975, which is almost 50 years ago, when the Biological Weapons Convention went into force, research on biological weapons had to go underground, right? It was prohibited. So we don't really know what has been discovered in the last 48 years. And that's a concern to me. I don't know what kind of weapons may be, hidden in labs somewhere. We don't have a good way of controlling this whole subject, and you cannot do experiments with these kinds of microorganisms without lab accidents. Lab accidents are simply impossible to prevent. We've done our best. We have people in moon suits with air. The air that they're breathing comes from outside the room or the building. We have vaccines, we have monoclonal antibodies, we have all sorts of things, but still, you're experimenting with animals. The animals bite you, or the animals escape from their cages, or the animals disappear and you can't find them. And if you don't know if the other animals ate them or what happened to them. And so here in the United States at Fort Detrick, researchers at Fort Detrick would get infected with the diseases they were studying every so often. And this has happened in other centers too. And in the United States, the CDC and the USDA monitor all experiments done with what's called select agents. So agents that we think could cause pandemics, in humans or animals or even plants. If they could wipe out, for instance, during World War II, the United States was studying pests that would destroy the Japanese rice crop. Yeah, so that was one strategy we were considering using. I don't think we actually got to use it, but we developed it. We had wheat rust to wipe out a wheat crop, probably in Russia. We had anthrax cattle cakes to drop so that the animals would eat them and then die of anthrax. So, and this is in World War II. So now we're talking 80 years ago or more. So we were able to create these weapons then. You have to ask, with, you know, advances in biotechnology, what are we able to do now? I think we need very strict regulations to prevent their development, to prevent stockpiling, and to prevent use. And we need to have inspections. We have a treaty. It's ready to have these amendments added to it, to add the inspections, to add the punishments, and to make it tight. But unfortunately, the United States doesn't want that, because we have a well-developed biotechnology industry. We feel probably we can make these weapons better than most other countries. So we have a, you know, an advantage there. So instead, we're coming up with, you know, we come up with ways to make it sound like we're managing them. We had a moratorium on gain-of-function research for 4 years in the United States, but it was only for SARS coronaviruses and for avian flu viruses. It wasn't for everything else. But people thought we had a moratorium. You know, they thought they were protected. In the United States, you can have a private laboratory, and if you don't get grants from the government, and it's not in a government lab, you just build your own high containment lab. You can do experiments with these microorganisms, and there's no law that stops you.
Wow, really? Oh, I see.
So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and what they're doing absolutely incorrectly is these two treaties. Now, let me also tell you, they keep changing the name of, you've called it the Pandemic Accord. That was one name. They've called it the Pandemic Treaty, the CA+, the Zero Draft, the Bureau Draft. The current name is Pandemic Agreement, because that sounds very benign, doesn't it? It's just an agreement. But that's what it's being called now, Pandemic Agreement. And the other document is amendments to the international health regulations. But they're both treaties.
Yes. That's what I recently learned, that we have to advocate strong, so that even also in Japan, Japanese diet have to approve before implementing it. Yes.
Good. Yes.
Yes. Dr. Nass, thank you very much. It's been very educational and important conversation. I wish we have 10 more Dr. Nass in this world. That's what we need right now. But so in Japan, many people have started to realize what's happening, including some of the congressmen. So in 2 days, which is March 14th, we have the fourth time we have a parliamentary caucus on World Health Organization pandemic agreement and IHR amendment. So every time they get to ask questions to the people from Ministry of Health and from Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And each time they manage to not to answer the questions correctly, but because they kept ignoring us and not being faithful, honest to us. So many people, by the attitudes that they do, they show, get attraction from a lot of more Japanese people who are not aware of it. So that's happening soon. So I hope many people, including the Japanese congressmen, will watch and listen to you. And then we will ask the right question, what we need. So thank you very much. And lastly, could you give us a message to Japanese people, including how we can fight, please?
Yes. Well, you don't want your country to sign these agreements. And you want to ask why? Why are they signing them? Why would you give one person in the world the power to direct what drugs and vaccines everybody in the world has to have? I mean, there's no reason to do that. It doesn't make any sense. Also, as I said, he's not even a doctor. He has a PhD. So I think that's one question. Another question is, why are they lying to us about what is in the documents? They are saying that the documents don't take sovereignty away from the country, but if they can run public health in your country, that's taking sovereignty away. Tedros says he doesn't want any power to lock down or to mandate vaccines. Well, it's in the documents, it's in the WHO documents, whether he wants that power or not, he's being given it in the documents. We also had 3 people from the State Department, the USAID, and the Health Department answer questions for congressmen, and they were completely misleading about what the treaty and the amendments were going to do. So they've been given talking points, they've been told what to say and what not to say. They change the subject when it gets uncomfortable, and Tedros lies. And so the question is, why the reason for the secrecy?
Okay, thank you very much. We will do what we can do in Japan so that our fight in Japan can contribute to the fight in the world, because we need to be united. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, and I hope we can continue do good fighting, and I hope you're well too.
Thank you very much, Masako. We can talk again. If you need my help in Japan, you just ask.
はい、ということで、今、インタビューご覧いただきましたが、皆さん、この現状ですね、本当に恐ろしい状況の世の中に我々は生きているんだなというのを皆さんも感じられたと、思います。いろんな観点にわたって、パンデミック条約なんですけれども、本当専門家の視点からすると本当もうとんでもないものであると。で、博士がですね、途中で、ご自身の経験を私もぜひ直接お聞きしたかったので、医師免許がどうして、停止されることになったのかですね。これは、ナス博士の経験、聞いて終わりっていうものではなくてですね、その話を聞いた我々も、その今後、自分たちの身を守るために、これ学ばなければいけないことがたくさん入っている、出来事、経験なんですよね。で、博士が、医師会に目をつけられて、そして最初に言われたことは、憲法違反だったので、向こう側もまた途中で矛を収めた。でもまた新しい難癖をつけて、それを全部有罪にして、免許停止にしたと。このルールがあって、それにきちんと従っていても、そして自分は、正直にこうであるというふうに言ってもですね、もう何が真実で何が間違っているのかとか、そういう人の価値基準とか、あるいは攻撃をすることでもう、なんて言うんでしょう、人を孤立させようとかですね、いろんな手口を、ステップを経ることで、博士のような立ち上がっている人をですね、攻撃して、周りにいる人たちにですね、あなたたちも博士のように立ち上がったら同じ目に遭うんだぞって、これ博士だけが標的ではないわけですよね。社会全体が標的なんですよ。だからこそ、そういう状況だからこそ、それでも立ち上がって、声を上げ続けているナス博士っていうのは本当にすごいし、社会にとってですね、本当に重要なこの存在なんですよね。くじけなかったということは、希望をみんなに見せてるわけですよ。そういうことで、自分も頑張ろうとか、自分も立ち上がろう、自分が思っていることを言い続けよう。それでも、この世の中でやっていけるし、そういう人がどんどん増えることで、みんなですね、同じように、この勇気を出せるわけなんですよね。だから博士がこうやって頑張ってくださっていることはみんなのためになっているということで、本当、私も感謝もしていますし、遠いアメリカで頑張っていらっしゃる方ですけど、向こうで頑張っていることは、日本にいる我々全体、みんなのためなんだというのをぜひ皆さんにも本当実感してほしいと思います。で、私はですね、ぜひ皆さんに提案したいのがあるんですけれども、こうやってもう今も第一線でですね、立ち上がって いろいろ教えてくださるナス博士。博士 X でアカウントを持っていて、いろいろまた自分のご自身の考えとか、いろんなことを発信されていますので、ぜひ、今ですね、ちょっと説明欄には後から配信で入れますけれども、そのリンクを、今表示されてます。メリルナス博士のアカウントリンク、ここから博士の、X アカウント見れますから、ぜひフォローして応援をし、そして、メッセージを、直接のメールメッセージだと博士ももう忙しい方なんで、メッセージ見るのは大変だと思うんですけど、投稿の下にですね、コメントなんてつけてパッパッパって見れるじゃないですか。そこに、頑張ってくださってありがとうとか、皆さんがそれぞれ思われた、感想とかですね、応援のメッセージを、もう日本からもこんなに応援してる人がたくさんいるんだよっていうことを、ぜひ博士に一緒に皆さん伝えてほしいんですよね。それがもう私からの、提案であります。はい。で、このコメントを見れない方は、終わってから私下の説明欄にですね、リンクを貼りますので、ぜひそちらから、この博士を応援しようキャンペーンに参加していただきたいと思います。で、私はですね、グローバリズム全体主義に関してずっと、いろんな視点から、いろいろ調べて発信をしている立場なので、いろんなものがちょっとこれとこれ関係ないんじゃないのって思うものがどんどん調べていけばいくほどつながってくるんですよ。で、例えばですね、私が前からどうやって、全体主義的な社会を作っていくのか、やっぱり言論狩りとか、いろんな社会、気づいたらみんながなんか反論できない世の中になっていた。そういったものっていうのは意図的に作り出されていて、どういったステップでこれがなされるのかっていうのをですね、いろいろ動画作ってるじゃないですか。心理学者の先生にインタビューしたりだとか、本の内容をインタビューしたり、この本を書かれたステラ・モラビトさんという元 CIA の方なんですけど、ソ連について詳しい、この方にインタビューしたり、こういった手口が、要するに、立ち上がっている、このパンデミックの問題とかで立ち上がっているお医者さんに、実際に手口が使われてるんですよね。だから、じゃあ博士がこういうこと起きた。じゃあ我々はそうか、何を学べるかというと、すごいですねで終わるんじゃなくて、じゃあ自分も何かあった時のためにくじけないためにもですね、こういった本を読むとか、あるいはステラ・モラビドさんのインタビューありますので、過去のものをぜひ見て参考にしていただきたいと思います。これ全部つながっているんですよ。で、まだこの翻訳は出ていないんですけれども、このレイプ・オブ・ザ・マインドっていう本もですね、以前からこれいいですよって紹介をしているものですけれども、この本も心の、言葉ですけど、心のレイプ、要するに精神的な我々ですね、身体的なこの痛めつけよりも、実は我々って心を痛めつけられる方がですね、よーく答えるんですよ。だから、戦争とか、あるいは全体主義的な社会の中で、拷問とかですね、いろんなその心を支配していくような手口が取られる。そのことを表現して、じゃあ、レイプ・オブ・ザ・マインドってなってるんですけど、こういう本も私もたまに解説して取り上げたりしていますから、ぜひ過去の動画もですね、参考にしていただきたいと思います。はい。で、今日の配信ご覧いただいて、いろんな言葉とかも、もう関係なしに、今日これですね、これ YouTube で流したらどうなるのかなとかいろいろ思ったんですけれども、でも、私もそう思って自分のチャンネル何か伝えたいためにやってるのに、検閲されるからじゃあ配信この話題扱わないとかなったら本末転倒になっちゃうじゃないですか。だから、いや、これはもうそのまま、配信するべきじゃないかと思ってですね、もう4つチャンネルありますけど、全部等しく同じように、流しています。はい。ということで、イベルメクチンの薬の話とか、いろいろありましたよね。そういうのがあったので、この YouTube どうなるかは、バンされる可能性もあるわけじゃないですか。これまでの過去のいろんな人の配信。なので、何が言いたいかって、もう一回見たいとか、アーカイブどこにあるかなっていう人は、同時配信4つしてますので、X とかランブルっていうのがありますね。で、Facebook はこの同時配信のアーカイブ機能もなさないと思うんですけど、Facebook と YouTube、この4つでやってますから、必ずどこかは生きて残ると、そういうことでやってますので、ぜひ皆さん、そちら もチェックして、アーカイブはここで手に入ると、そういうふうに思っていただければと思います。はい。そういうわけで、今日の配信、非常にためになりますし、ただなんか情報を皆さんに配信するっていうよりも、なんていうの、医師免許剥奪されてですよ。で、そんな散々ひどい目に遭っているのに、今でも第一線に立って、立ち上がり続けるこのお医者さん、これが本当のお医者さんの先生なんだなーって。ただルールに従って、はい、薬ホイホイって出すんじゃなくてですね。私は我々患者とかこの一般の人からすると、この先生信用できるの？何かあったらどうすんのみたいな、そんなことも考えずに、もうホイホイワクチン打ってるお医者さんとかもいっぱいいるわけですよ。赤ちゃんにも勧めたいですよ。こんな世の中で、こういう心のあるですね、お医者さんの先生がいるっていうのは本当にもう希望ですし、そういう先生もいるわけですから、自分自身のそれぞれの立場でできることは何なんだろうと。それをぜひこれを機会にですね、また考えていただきたいなと、それも思います。はい。で、3月14日、明日ですね、また WCH 議連原口和弘先生が中心となって行われているパンデミック条約に関する勉強会、議員の勉強会になりますけれども、それが第4回が開催されます。また、どうなるのか国民はちゃんと見てると。我々の声を無視をしてはいけないと。勝手に試験を売り渡すようなことをしちゃいけないと。そういったことをですね、我々からまた声を広めていかなければいけないと思いますので、ぜひ皆さん注視していただきたいと思います。はい。そして4月13日のデモも100万人デモを目指して林千勝先生中心に準備されていますので、ぜひ皆さん参加していただければと思います。はい。ということでですね、今日の配信は本当に勇気の出る話だったのかなと私は思います。内容は本当にシビアなものでありますけれども、ですからこれ何としてでもストップさせなければいけません。はい。ぜひ周りの方にもこの話をですね、して広めていただきたいと思います。はい。ということで、本日の配信はこれで終わりたいと思います。皆さん、本日も最後までご視聴いただきましてありがとうございました。また次の配信でお会いしましょう。